The Man in the Iron Mask. The extraordinary true story of Harry Bensley's walk around the world. Imagine you are standing at Trafalgar Square on the first morning of 1908. The hangover of New Year's Eve is still draped across the city like a damp coat. The pavements are slicked with rain and horse dung and the remains of last night's revelry. It is bitterly cold. A northeasterly wind is cutting down the Strand like a blade. And then, through the crowd, comes a figure that stops every single person in their tracks. A man, walking, pushing a large black perambulator, a pram, piled high with clothes and postcards, dressed in an ordinary traveling coat and heavy boots. Utterly unremarkable in every way, except for his face. His face is not there. In place of his face is iron. Cold, black iron. A helmet, the face guard of a medieval suit of armor, bolted across his head. A placard on the front of it reads, in neat painted letters, "Walking round the world." The crowd stares. Then someone laughs. Then someone cheers. Then the street erupts, flags waving, confetti streaming, women throwing flowers, men shouting encouragement and insults in equal measure. Children run alongside him, and hawkers sell penny pamphlets with his photograph on the front. And the man with the iron face says nothing, just nods, just walks. This is the story of Harry Bensley, and it is one of the strangest, most romantic, most debated, and most mysteriously beautiful stories in British history. Before we follow this masked man out of London, we need to understand the world he was stepping into. Because 1908 was not just any year. It was a world balanced on the edge of everything. The British Empire was at its largest. On maps, entire continents were painted red, a red that meant British dominion, British rule, British ships in every harbor on Earth. It seemed invincible, permanent, eternal. And yet, beneath that confidence, things were stirring. The suffragette movement was growing louder and more dangerous by the month. The trade unions were testing their power. Germany was building its navy at a pace that made admirals sweat over their morning coffee. In the drawing rooms of Mayfair, men whispered about whether the old order could hold. It was also a world drunk on spectacle. This was the golden age of the stunt, the dare, the public wager. In the absence of cinema, of television, of the internet, the newspapers were entertainment, and people devoured stories of extraordinary human endeavor with a hunger we can barely imagine today. Long-distance walkers were celebrities. Channel swimmers were heroes. Men who did impossible things became household names overnight. And so, on New Year's Day, when word spread through London that a man in an iron mask was walking out of Trafalgar Square to circle the earth, the newspapers were already waiting. Harry Bensley understood his moment perfectly, whether or not he had planned it that way. And that is a question we will return to many times. He had found the exact note that an entire nation was aching to hear. So who was Harry Bensley? The honest answer is, we are not entirely sure. What we know, or believe we know, is this. Harry Bensley was born around 1876 or 1877, making him 30 or 31 years old when he stepped out of Trafalgar Square. He was English, well-spoken, clearly educated, and by all accounts possessed of tremendous physical stamina and an almost supernatural ability to charm people. He described himself, depending on the audience, as a businessman, a speculator, an investor. The newspapers referred to him as a man of independent means who had enjoyed what they delicately called a comfortable West End existence. This was Edwardian code. It meant money, clubs, theater, late suppers, beautiful women, and whiskey. He was, by some accounts, married. He had, reportedly, 2 small children. He had investments, substantial ones, apparently in Russia, which was in those years experiencing its own industrial boom and offering eye-watering returns to those willing to risk their capital at the edge of the civilized world. He was, in short, a man who had made something of himself, and who had, in a single long night of gambling in December 1907, risked losing almost all of it. Because the story begins, as so many extraordinary stories do, not with a great plan or a noble ambition, but with a night that went wrong. The exact details of what happened that night in December 1907 are disputed. They may always be disputed, but here is what the legend says. It was late. The club was quiet in the way that expensive clubs get quiet after midnight. Not empty, but settled. The remaining men deep in their chairs, their brandy, their conversations. The fire was still going. The smell of tobacco and old wood and money hung in the air. Two men, among others, were at a card table. One was Hugh Cecil Lowther, the 5th Earl of Lonsdale, a man who might have been invented by a novelist who wanted to write the perfect English aristocrat. He was large, florid, magnificent, famous for his love of boxing. He would later lend his name to the Lonsdale belt, still the most coveted prize in British boxing today. He was also famous for his gambling. He spent money with the cheerful abandon of a man who has never had to think about where it comes from. The other man, if the legend is accurate, was John Pierpont Morgan. Yes, that J.P. Morgan, the American financier whose very name was, in 1908, synonymous with almost incomprehensible wealth. Morgan had been in London, as he often was, doing what rich and powerful men do in London, being seen, being courted, being entertained. He was in his early 70s by this point, but still formidable, still razor-sharp, still, it seems, fond of a wager. The bet, as it was described in the newspapers, went something like this. Morgan wagered that no Englishman could walk around the world, visiting a specified list of British cities, crossing into 18 other countries, collecting postage stamps from each, without being identified. The disguise would be the Iron Mask. The man would carry no money beyond his starting pound, and must finance his journey entirely through the sale of postcards and pamphlets of himself. He must, furthermore, find a wife on the road, a woman who would agree to marry him without ever having seen his face. The prize, if the journey was completed, £15,000 from Morgan and £6,000 from Lonsdale. £21,000. In 2024 money, that is something close to £3 million. The penalty for failure, Harry Bensley's debts, whatever they were, whatever they amounted to, would be cleared against his Russian investments. He would, in short, be financially ruined. Did Bensley, in that lamplit room, pause? Did he think of his wife, his children, his investments, his comfortable life? Did he weigh the odds with a clear head? Probably not. He was, by most accounts, not entirely sober. And he said yes. In the morning, of course, things look different. The club is cold. The fire is ash. The consequences are solid and real in a way that last night's logic is not. But there it was, witnessed and recorded. The wager was made, and Harry Bensley had 6 days to prepare. The rules of the wager were precise and, in some respects, almost cruelly designed to make failure as likely as possible. First, the mask. Bensley was to wear an iron helmet, the face guard of a genuine medieval suit of armor, at all times when in public. He could remove it in private, in his room at night, or in the presence of the designated minder. But in public, in daylight, facing the world, the mask stayed on. He could not speak his name. If anyone identified him beyond reasonable doubt, the wager was void. Second, the route. He had to visit 169 British towns and cities, a list agreed in advance, before leaving England's shores and traveling through 18 other countries, collecting a postage stamp from each. Third, the perambulator. He had to push it throughout the journey. The pram would carry his spare clothes and his stock of postcards, small printed photographs of himself in the mask, which he sold at a penny each. This was his income, his entire income. Fourth, the bride. Somewhere on the road, Bensley had to find a woman willing to marry him without ever seeing his face. A proposal would have to be made and accepted while the mask was still on. The minder would verify the engagement. And fifth, and perhaps most importantly, the minder himself. An American gentleman, whose name is not reliably recorded in any source I have found, he appears in Bensley's own accounts simply as the minder, was to accompany Bensley for the entirety of the journey. He was there not as a companion exactly, but as a witness, a watchman, a guarantee against cheating. He slept in the next room. He walked a few paces behind. He kept his own notes. He was, in every meaningful sense, Bensley's shadow. Can you imagine that? 6 years on the road, you and your shadow, your jailer, your proof. The morning of January the 1st, 1908 was, by all meteorological accounts, dreadful. The temperature was just above freezing. A northeasterly wind was driving sleet across the Thames. The streets of London were still littered with the evidence of the night before. And yet, by 10 o'clock in the morning, a crowd had gathered at Trafalgar Square that the newspapers would later estimate at several thousand people. They had read about it in the papers. Word had spread through the clubs and the parlors and the boarding houses and the factories. A man in an iron mask was going to walk around the world. Today, starting here, Harry Bensley emerged from his hotel, where he had slept, barely, the iron mask propped on the nightstand, his few coins counted and recounted, and stepped into Trafalgar Square at 10:30 in the morning. He was pushing the perambulator. The mask was on. The placard read, "Walking round the world." The crowd, which had been restless and noisy, went briefly, wonderfully silent, and then erupted. Confetti, cheering, women throwing paper flowers, a brass band somewhere playing something inappropriately cheerful, penny pamphlets being sold by street boys who had somehow got hold of advance copies, men in homemade paper face masks, parodies of the iron original, waving and shouting. And through it all, Harry Bensley nodding, collecting the coins and the notes thrown at him, tucking them into the perambulator, and walking. He walked down the Strand, past the theaters with their gaudy painted hoardings, past the coffee houses and the chop shops and the newspaper sellers, onto Cheapside, where the traders were opening up despite the holiday, over London Bridge, already busy despite the hour, the great river gray and choppy beneath him, and then south, along the Thames, through the damp, flat, working streets of southeast London. The crowds thinned as the morning wore on and the cold deepened. The confetti was left behind at London Bridge. The brass band's last note faded, and it was just Harry and the pram and the minder a few paces behind and the road. He would later write that it was somewhere along the river road, with the city's noise finally falling away behind him, that the full reality of what he had agreed to descended upon him. Not with fear exactly, with something more complex. A kind of giddy vertigo, as if he had stepped off a cliff and not yet decided whether to fall or fly. A heron was standing in the shallows, utterly still, entirely unbothered by the river traffic, the iron-faced man, the strange contraption he was pushing. Bensley watched it for a moment and felt, he said, an unexpected calm. He was on his way, whatever on his way was going to mean. The walk from Trafalgar Square to Woolwich is approximately 12 miles. On a good day, in good boots, in good weather, it is a pleasant enough walk along the south bank of the Thames. January the 1st, 1908 was not a good day. It was bitterly cold, intermittently sleeting, and Harry Bensley was wearing an iron mask weighing approximately 2 kilograms, roughly 4.5 pounds, on his face. The mask covered not just his features, but his peripheral vision, muffled his hearing, and made breathing in the cold air a labored, almost painful business. The perambulator, loaded with clothes and postcards, was heavy and awkward on the wet, uneven roads. His boots were already soaking. They arrived in Woolwich shortly after 9 in the evening. More than 10 hours to walk 12 miles. That is how hard the day had been. The first inn they found, the Mitre, if Bensley's memory served him correctly, was still lively with holiday drinkers. When the masked man and his silent American escort pushed through the door, the room went quiet in the way rooms always went quiet around Harry Bensley. And then loud again, with questions. Over beef pies and ale, the first proper food either man had eaten since a hurried breakfast that morning, Bensley held court. He sold postcards. He told his story. He answered questions about the journey ahead. He was charming, vague about the personal details. No one would know his name, his face, his history, not really, and seemingly inexhaustible in his good humor. The innkeeper, a large-handed, dry-voiced man with what appeared to be some sort of neck condition, showed them to their rooms. Small, clean, warm enough, a little stuffy. Bensley checked under the bed before removing the mask. Old habit? Caution? Simple eccentricity? He never explained. He slept that night as a man who has walked 12 miles in an iron mask sleeps. Completely. Immediately. The snoring from the minder next door didn't bother him at all. The weeks and months that followed the Woolwich departure established the rhythm of what would become years of traveling. Bensley moved methodically. He was working through the list of 169 towns and cities, generally moving northward from London. He walked, on average, between 15 and 20 miles a day, extraordinary by any standard, but especially so in those conditions, in that equipment, with that burden. Each town brought its own particular flavor of encounter. In some places, especially the smaller market towns of Kent and Sussex, he was met with pure bewilderment. People stood in their doorways and stared. Was this a fairground act? A traveling show? Some kind of elaborate advertisement? The placard was read aloud, over and over, walking round the world. The perambulator was inspected. In larger towns, where the newspapers arrived daily and the story was already circulating, he was received like a visiting celebrity. Local dignitaries sometimes came out to meet him. Shop owners sent boys to run ahead with the news of his approach. School children were given the afternoon off to line the road and watch him pass. He sold his postcards everywhere, at a penny each, and sometimes more from those who wanted to be generous or to show off in front of their friends. The perambulator, far from being emptied as he sold, always seemed to carry more, because sympathetic locals often gave him fresh stock. Food, clean socks, small coins slipped quietly into his palm. England, it turned out, adored Harry Bensley. Or rather, it adored the idea of him. The masked man, the man without a face, the mystery, because there was always the mystery. People wanted to know who he was. Not just idly, they burned with it. Bets were placed in public houses. Theories were printed in the letters pages of newspapers. One correspondent wrote confidently that he was a well-known aristocrat doing penance for an unspecified sin. Another that he was an American in disguise, which would certainly explain the minder. A clergyman in Birmingham wrote in to say he was almost certain the man was a former parishioner who had run into debt. None of them were right, or at least none of them could prove it. The mask held. What struck observers most, apart from the mask itself, was Bensley's temperament. He was, by universal account, cheerful, unfailingly, almost irritatingly cheerful. He had a ready word for everyone. He was patient with the curious, diplomatic with the hostile. There were a few, men who thought the whole thing was a confidence trick, or a fraud, or an insult to the dignity of the road, and seemingly never, in public at least, downcast. What he felt in private, pushing the pram alone through a January night on the Great North Road with the rain coming down and his boots soaked through and his face cold iron and the minder 10 paces behind and silent, that we can only imagine. Now, the question of the bride. The requirement was, by any rational measure, absurd. A woman had to agree to marry Harry Bensley, without having seen his face, without knowing his name with certainty, knowing only that he was a man on a wager who would not remove his mask until the journey was complete. And yet, people said yes. The first recorded proposal was somewhere in the south of England. Accounts differ on the exact location. A woman in a market town, apparently charmed by the combination of Bensley's voice, his manner, and what she called his complete sincerity, agreed to write her name in his small red notebook as a prospective bride. Whether this constituted a genuine engagement or a romantic joke is impossible to say at this distance. The minder witnessed it. Over the course of the journey, Bensley would receive, and this is the figure he himself gave, 204 proposals of marriage. He never claimed to have proposed all of them. Often, he said, women simply offered. A letter left at an inn ahead of his arrival. A note pressed into his hand by a woman in a crowd. A message relayed through a landlady or a postmaster. Marry me, the iron-faced man. I don't need to see your face. What does that tell us about 1908? About the lives of women in 1908? About the hunger for something, anything, outside the ordinary? You could spend a very long time thinking about those 204 proposals. He did, eventually, choose one woman. Her name was most likely a woman from a small Norfolk village, though historians have never confirmed this with total certainty. What is agreed is that she was young, apparently educated, apparently unattached, and by all accounts absolutely serious. She accepted. The minder noted it. The engagement was, for a time, a story in itself. The mystery bride of the man in the iron mask, who had agreed to marry a man she had never properly seen. Whether they ever actually married, whether the journey ever ended in the way it was supposed to end, is a story we will come to. But that engagement, that young woman in whatever village it was who looked at an iron face and said yes, she deserves a moment of quiet attention. Because what she agreed to was, in its own strange way, one of the most romantic things in this whole story. By the time Bensley crossed the border into Scotland, he had been walking for several months. The journey had its own strange internal logic by now. The perambulator had been repaired twice. His boots had been replaced more than once, always by gift or goodwill. His stock of postcards was replenished by a printer in Liverpool who did it. he said, simply because it seemed like the right thing to do. Scotland received him differently from England. The Scottish character, or at least the Scottish character as it existed in 1908 in those northern towns and villages, had a particular quality of seriousness about it. People were less likely to laugh, more likely to simply watch. A man in Dumfries asked Bensley, with complete directness, whether he had lost his mind. Bensley said he was still looking for it, but the hospitality was, if anything, warmer than England's. In the Highlands especially, where the distances between settlements were vast and the tradition of hospitality to travelers was ancient and deeply held, Bensley found himself welcomed into farmhouses and crofts, given meals, allowed to sleep by the fire. No one tried to unmask him. No one reported him to a local authority as a suspicious character, though in some English towns, police constables had been called to investigate the strange figure with the iron face. It was in Scotland, Bensley later said, that he began to understand what the journey was actually about. It was not, he thought, about the wager. The wager was the reason he had left. But the journey, the actual thing of walking from one end of a country to the other, sleeping in different beds every few nights, eating whatever was offered, receiving the kindness of people who had no reason to be kind to you. That was something else entirely. It was, he said, the closest thing to freedom he had ever felt. Which is a strange thing to say while wearing an iron mask. But then, Harry Bensley was a man who had a gift for irony. While Bensley walked, the newspapers kept talking. The British press of 1908 was a formidable creature. The popular papers, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Daily Express, all of them still relatively new and hungry for stories that would sell, had discovered that human interest was the currency of circulation. And Harry Bensley was pure human interest. There was a story every few weeks. Bensley in Birmingham, Bensley at Stonehenge, Bensley photographed by a society photographer in Edinburgh, Bensley refusing to remove his mask for a magistrate in some small coastal town. The postcards, sold by the man himself, were collector's items. People wrote to newspapers requesting the address of the nearest point on his route so they could come out and see him. He had become, without quite meaning to, a symbol. Different people saw different things in him. The romantics saw adventure. The suffragettes, and this is genuinely interesting, were fascinated by the bride condition, and at least one feminist newspaper column argued that the woman who agreed to marry him was, in her own way, as subversive as any march or petition. The religious press periodically suggested he was running from God. The sporting press calculated his mileage with obsessive precision. And through it all, the central mystery remained intact. Who was he? Because here is the thing about the iron mask. It worked. Not just as a physical disguise, though it was certainly that, but as a psychological one. Without a face, Harry Bensley became a surface onto which anyone could project anything. He was the adventurer. He was the fool. He was the romantic. He was the sinner doing penance. He was the everyman. He was the escape from the ordinary. He was whatever you needed him to be. And that, perhaps more than the physical endurance, more than the miles, more than the mask itself, was his real genius. At some point in 1909, the exact date is uncertain, as so many dates in this story are, Harry Bensley left England. He crossed the Channel from Dover. The crossing in January or February was rough, the sea gray and hostile, the ferry packed with commercial travelers and a few foolhardy tourists. Bensley stood at the rail in his iron mask, the wind off the channel, and watched England get smaller. He would need to visit 18 countries in total. The route, agreed in advance, though the details were not fully public, took him through France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and further. The postcards had been reprinted with French text on the reverse. The perambulator, which had survived hundreds of miles of English roads, was apparently not pleased with French cobblestones. France received him with what can only be described as enthusiastic bewilderment. The French press, which got wind of the story quickly, was fascinated. A man in an iron face? Walking for a bet? With an American escort? Mais oui, they were entirely here for it. Parisians came out to see him in considerable numbers. A French journalist wrote a piece calling him Le Chevalier Moderne, the modern knight, which pleased Bensley greatly. He was becoming, in a sense, a European figure. The story of the man in the iron mask crossed borders in a way that few human interest stories managed to do in those years before film and radio. People in Germany, in Belgium, in the Netherlands read about him in their own newspapers. And when he arrived, still masked, still pushing the pram, still selling postcards, they came out to look. He collected his stamps. He ate the local food and wrote, in his notes, with evident delight, about the differences in bread and cheese between one country and the next. He slept in pensions and goose houses and, occasionally, barns. The minder shadowed him, noted everything, and apparently spoke only when spoken to. The miles accumulated. The years accumulated. By 1912, Bensley had been walking for 4 years. He had covered, by his own estimate, and the minder's records, something approaching 30,000 miles. He had visited most of the agreed towns and cities in Britain. He had completed a significant portion of his international route. He had become, in a very real sense, a permanent feature of the European landscape. The man who was always arriving somewhere. The man with the iron face who never quite stayed. By 1914, the world that Harry Bensley had been walking through was starting to tremble. The signs were everywhere, for anyone willing to read them. The arms race between Britain and Germany had been escalating for years. The alliance systems that would drag half of Europe into war had been in place for decades, wound tighter with every diplomatic crisis. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 had redistributed power and territory in southeastern Europe in ways that satisfied no one and alarmed everyone. And in Sarajevo, on the 28th of June, 1914, a young man fired 2 shots. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was dead. His wife Sophie was dead. And the machinery of treaties and alliances and mobilization orders began to turn, slowly at first, and then with terrible speed. By August, Europe was at war. And Harry Bensley, the man in the iron mask, was somewhere on a road in Europe. The exact location is not recorded when the news reached him. What did he feel? Standing there, in the mask, with the perambulator? After 6.5 years? After 30,000 miles? When he understood that the world he had been walking through was about to stop existing in the form he had known it. He turned around. He came home. The wager was officially declared void. Neither Morgan nor Lonsdale collected. Bensley was released from his obligations. The financial penalties, whatever they had been, apparently forgiven or absorbed in the greater catastrophe of the war. The minder, presumably, went back to America. The journey ended not at a finish line, not to a cheering crowd, not with a bride on his arm and 21,000 pounds in his pocket, but in the gray August silence of a continent preparing to destroy itself. Harry Bensley took off his mask, and no one was watching. What happened to Harry Bensley after 1914? This is where the historical record, already thin, becomes almost transparent. We know, or believe we know, that he did not fight in the war. His age would have made him around 37 or 38 in 1914, just within the initial voluntary enlistment range, but with multiple reasons to be exempt. His precise whereabouts and activities during the war years are not reliably documented. We know that he survived the war. He was alive in the 1920s. There are a handful of references, in local newspaper archives and in the memoir of at least one person who claimed to have met him, that place him in England after 1918, living what appears to have been a relatively quiet life. The Russian investments, if they ever existed in the form described, would have been catastrophically affected by the 1917 revolution. The Bolsheviks nationalized foreign-held assets without compensation. If Bensley had indeed held significant wealth in Russia, it was gone. The bride, the woman from Norfolk or wherever she was, does not appear in the historical record after the wager was canceled. Whether the engagement was dissolved, whether she moved on, whether Bensley returned to his wife and children or found a different path, we do not know. He died, according to the best available evidence, sometime in the 1950s. Old, unremarked, no iron mask, no perambulator, just a man, growing old in a world that had been remade twice over since he set out from Trafalgar Square on New Year's Day, 1908. Here is the thing that serious historians have been asking for decades, and that we probably need to address. Did it actually happen? Not the walking. That part is well documented. Harry Bensley walked. He walked for years, in a mask, pushing a pram. There are photographs. There are newspaper reports from multiple countries. There are postcards, some of which have survived and appear occasionally in auction catalogs. The walking is real. But the wager? There is no record, in the archives of J.P. Morgan's extensive correspondence, of any such bet being made. The Earl of Lonsdale's records are similarly silent. No contemporary account from 1907 describes the fateful card game in the Pall Mall Club. The specific terms, the list of cities, the bride requirement, the postcards, the minder, were reported by Bensley himself and repeated by the newspapers without meaningful verification. Which raises the question, did Harry Bensley simply invent the whole thing? Not the walk. The walk was real and remarkable. But the wager, the story of the wager, the famous names attached to it, the melodramatic gambling debts, the ruinous night at the club, could that have been a brilliantly constructed piece of narrative that Bensley created to give his walk a reason, a shape, a story that the newspapers would buy and the public would follow? If so, it was genius. Pure, audacious, Edwardian genius. Because think about it. Without the wager, Bensley is just a man walking around Britain in an unusual hat. With the wager, he is a hero, a mystery, a romantic figure, a spectacle, a brand. A man whose story writes itself from one end of the island to the other and sells itself in penny postcards along the way. The mask was, among other things, perfect marketing. You cannot photograph a face that isn't there. You cannot write a definitive biography of a man without a name. You cannot disprove a wager that left no paper trail. The mask was not just a disguise. It was a business model. Or, and this is the other possibility, it was all exactly as he said. The wager happened. Morgan and Lonsdale were involved. The debt was real. The threat was real. And a man with his back against the wall walked the only way out he could see. Forward. We will probably never know for certain. The iron mask protected his face. It also protected his secrets. Walk the roads of England today, and they are very different roads from the ones Harry Bensley walked in 1908. The horses are gone. The mud, mostly, is tarmac. The pennies thrown by cheering crowds have been replaced by a different currency. The newspapers that made him famous have themselves been transformed almost beyond recognition. The club in Pall Mall where the wager was allegedly made is still there, still serving drinks, still keeping its secrets. But something of Harry Bensley is still on those roads, if you know how to look for it. He appears in local history books, in regional museum archives, in the faded memories of very old people who remembered their grandparents talking about the man with the iron face who came through the village. He appears in the Guinness Book of Records. He appears in the footnotes of histories of Edwardian popular culture and in the occasional magazine piece about great British eccentrics. He has become one of those figures who seem to crystallize something about a particular time and place. The last years before the Great War, before the old world ended, when it was still possible to believe that an extraordinary individual with an extraordinary idea could walk out of a city square and into legend. When you think about what was coming, the trenches, the gas, the millions of dead, the end of the empire, the revolution in Russia, the reshaping of everything, there is something almost heartbreaking about Harry Bensley in his iron mask, cheerfully selling postcards in a market square somewhere in the English Midlands, apparently convinced that the world was large and open and full of the possibility of a good story. He was right about the story, at least. Let us end where we began, in that small, warm, stuffy room in Woolwich. January the 1st, 1908. The first day of the journey. The first night. Harry Bensley has eaten his beef pie and drunk his ale and sold his postcards and told his story. The innkeeper with the large hands has bid him good night. The door is closed. The snoring from the minder's room next door drifts through the wall like a distant tide. Bensley sits on the bed. He reaches up. He unclips the iron mask and sets it on the nightstand. For the first time today, for the first time since Trafalgar Square, since the confetti, since the brass band and the cheering and the cold wind off the Thames, he is just a face in a room. Anonymous, unremarkable, a man on a bed in a Woolwich inn who has walked 12 miles today and has, by his own calculation, tens of thousands left to go. He checks under the bed. Nothing there. He blows out the candle. Outside, the Thames moves in the dark. A heron stands in the shallows, patient as stone, watching the tide come in. Tomorrow, Harry Bensley will put the mask back on. He will push the perambulator out onto the road. He will sell postcards and shake hands and be mysterious and cheerful and indefatigable. He will be the man in the iron mask. But tonight, for these few hours, in this small Woolwich room, He is simply a man. And perhaps that, in the end, is the most remarkable thing of all. There is a peculiar kind of magic in holding a postcard that is 116 years old. A few of Harry Bensley's penny postcards have survived. They appear occasionally at auction, tucked inside estate lots, slipped between the pages of old books, discovered in the bottom drawers of houses being cleared out after someone has died. They are small, black and white, slightly blurred in the way that all photographs of moving things were blurred in 1908. And they show a man in an iron mask, standing with a perambulator, looking for all the world like something from a dream you cannot quite remember. These postcards were his economy, his entire financial system for 6.5 years. Think about what that means for a moment. No bank account he could easily access on the road. No salary. No patron, beyond whatever the original wager had promised at the end. Just a stack of printed cards and the goodwill of strangers. 1 penny at a time. He had them printed, initially, before he left London. The first batch was modest, a few hundred, perhaps 1,000. But demand rapidly outstripped supply, and printers in various towns along the route produced fresh batches, sometimes with local information or a date printed on the reverse to mark the occasion of his visit. Some of these town-specific versions are now the rarest and most sought after by collectors, at a penny each, and some people paid more, either out of generosity or the desire to appear generous in front of their companions. A single good market day could bring in several shillings. A particularly enthusiastic crowd, like the one at Trafalgar Square on that first morning, could bring in pounds. The perambulator, piled with cards, was not just his luggage. It was his shop, but it was also something else. Something more interesting than a shop. Every postcard sold was a small piece of Harry Bensley entering a home, finding its way onto a mantelpiece, into a scrapbook, onto the wall of a parlor beside a calendar and a photograph of the Queen's coronation. People kept them. Parents showed them to children. Children grew up and kept them still. And so Bensley, who had no face, whose name was not reliably known, whose story may or may not have been entirely true, somehow managed to install himself, in miniature, in thousands of British homes. The Iron Mask looked out from all those mantelpieces. Patient, silent, watching. If that isn't a kind of immortality, I'm not sure what is. We have talked a great deal about Harry Bensley, but there is another figure in this story who deserves more attention than he usually gets. The Minder. He is referred to in Bensley's own accounts simply as the Minder, occasionally the American or my American escort. His name does not appear in any source I have been able to find with total confidence. He is photographed, occasionally, in images taken of Bensley on the road, a figure slightly behind, slightly out of focus, the brim of his hat turned away from the camera as if by instinct or instruction. He was there for 6.5 years. Think about that. 6.5 years walking the roads of Britain and Europe, sleeping in inns and goose houses, eating whatever was available, watching a man in an iron mask sell postcards to curious locals. He was not the story. He was never the story. He was the proof that the story was true. What kind of man agrees to that? He must have been extraordinarily patient. He must have been, in his own way, as peculiar as the man he was escorting. To give up 6 years of your life, your 30s, presumably, or perhaps your 40s, to be a shadow, a witness, a notary public of the surreal. Did they become friends? It seems almost impossible that they didn't. You cannot walk 20 miles a day beside a man for 6 years without developing something. A shorthand, a shared language of silence, a private joke that no one else would understand. The Minder, sleeping in the room next door in that Woolligen on the first night, snoring with what Bensley described as impressive volume. He was not just a functionary. He was, in some sense, the only person who truly knew Harry Bensley. The only person who saw both sides of the mask. In a story full of mysteries, he is perhaps the deepest. A man who spent 6 years as a supporting character in someone else's legend and was then simply gone. Back to America, presumably. Back to whatever life he had suspended. With his notebooks. With his memories. With 6 years of extraordinary days that he apparently never wrote about, never published, never told. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps somewhere, in an archive in New York or Boston or Chicago, there is a box of papers, a diary, a memoir, a long letter to a brother, in which the whole thing is written down from the other side. The view from just behind the perambulator. The truth, if there is a truth. I find myself hoping someone finds it. There is a moment that Bensley described, only once, briefly, in a newspaper interview given somewhere in the north of England in 1910, that I have thought about ever since I first read it. He said that on a November evening in his second year of walking, somewhere between two small towns whose names he did not give, in the last of the autumn light, he passed a farmhouse set back from the road. The lamp was lit inside. He could see through the window. He had stopped, briefly, to adjust something on the perambulator, a woman at a kitchen table, reading. She had not heard him. She did not know he was there. He stood and watched her for what he admitted was probably too long. She was not young, not old. She was simply a woman reading in lamplight at the end of a day. Her hair was coming loose from where it had been pinned. There was a cup of tea beside her, going cold. He said it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 2 years of walking. Not a landscape, not a cathedral, not the sea at dawn, which he also mentioned he had seen and admired. A woman reading in a kitchen. He did not knock on the door. He adjusted the pram and walked on. The minder, a few paces behind, said nothing, as the minder almost always said nothing. Why does this moment matter? It is so small, so ordinary. It is not in any history book. It proved nothing and changed nothing. But I think it tells us something about what the walk really cost Harry Bensley and what it gave him. The cost was exactly this: being outside the window, watching life in its ordinary, lamplit warmth from the cold side of the glass, carrying an iron face and a perambulator and a wager and a story, and not being able to simply knock on a door and sit down and be a person among people. The gift was the seeing, the clarity that comes with distance, the way that being outside of ordinary life, permanently in motion, permanently masked, makes you able to notice what people inside that life have stopped being able to see. The tea going cold, the hair coming loose, the lamp. He walked on. He always walked on. That was the condition of the whole enterprise. But that moment, a man in an iron mask standing in the dark outside a farmhouse window, watching a woman read. That is the image I come back to when I think about Harry Bensley. Not the cheering crowds, not the postcards, not the wager and the famous names and the newspapers. Just that, and the road continuing north into the dark. And so, after so many quiet steps taken through streets both familiar and strange, through towns where the morning mist lay soft over cobblestones, and through villages where the afternoon sun danced lazily across rooftops, Harry Bensley's long and unusual journey began to come to a gentle, peaceful pause. The iron mask, which had rested so steadily upon his face for years, concealing him from the world and shielding him from recognition, was finally removed. And though he had not completed the great challenge of walking entirely around the world, he had accomplished something far more remarkable. He had discovered patience, endurance, and quiet courage. And he had left behind a story that whispers softly to anyone willing to listen. Imagine, if you will, the calm streets he once wandered, empty now in the soft glow of evening, the faint clatter of distant horses echoing slowly over stone, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of trees that line narrow lanes. And in that stillness, you can feel the weight of time gently settling, as though the world itself pauses to honor the small, deliberate steps of a man who moved with such quiet purpose. He walked past people who paused in curiosity, who wondered about the mysterious figure behind the mask, who offered small coins, who gave him kind smiles, and though he never revealed his face, he carried in his heart the warmth of every fleeting connection, every quiet act of human kindness, and every soft glance that reminded him of the gentle beauty of the world. Step by step, town by town, country by country, his journey wove a tapestry of soft memories. The smell of freshly baked bread from a distant bakery, the sound of children laughing in a square as he passed quietly by, the faint song of a bird high in the branches above, the warm touch of sunlight on cold, early mornings, the soft trickle of water from a fountain, and the occasional patter of rain on rooftops that reminded him to keep moving, to keep walking, always forward, always slowly, always quietly. Even in the stillness of night, when the streets emptied and the soft glow of lanterns reflected gently on the pavement, he continued to move with a calm, measured rhythm, letting the quiet of the world become a companion, letting the gentle sounds of the night lull him into a sense of peace, each step echoing softly like a whisper of persistence, a gentle meditation on the power of slow, steady action. Over time, the world grew larger, more complicated, yet Harry's focus never wavered, for he knew that the journey itself, with all its strange challenges, its small triumphs and quiet setbacks, was more important than reaching any destination. The small perambulator he pushed along the way became a symbol of endurance, of carrying one's purpose steadily, of finding balance in the simplest of acts. And as he moved, he discovered that each small encounter, each smile, each act of generosity or curiosity left an imprint, not only on the people he met, but on himself, and on the story that would live long after his steps grew slower. There were mornings when the cold touched his face through the mask, when the wind whispered sharply across empty fields, yet he kept walking, keeping a steady pace, letting the soft rhythm of his steps become a meditation, a gentle mantra for life itself. Patience, endurance, courage, quiet determination, and gentle curiosity. And there were afternoons bathed in sunlight, when the warmth pressed softly against the stones of quiet streets, when the smell of flowers and bread and distant fires blended into the soft, calm air, and Harry felt the joy of simple moments, the small joys that make life soft and gentle and deeply meaningful. Even when offers of marriage came, invitations to recognition, fame, or comfort, he remained calm, carrying the mask and the perambulator as symbols of a promise he had made to himself and to the invisible bed of his unusual adventure, never rushing, never worrying, always moving slowly, letting the world pass softly around him, like a river flowing quietly by. And when the shadow of war reached across the lands he wandered, when distant drums of conflict stirred unease in quiet towns, he paused, not with disappointment, but with acceptance, knowing that his journey had already accomplished what mattered, teaching the power of small, steady steps, of quiet resolve, of a calm mind in the face of uncertainty. Imagine now the soft streets at night, empty and hushed, the gentle breeze brushing against your skin, the faint glow of lamps reflecting softly, the distant echo of a carriage or a footstep, and let yourself feel, as Harry might have felt, the deep calm of accomplishment, of a journey that, though unusual and strange, had brought beauty, patience, and quiet reflection to his life and to the world around him. And now, as we close this story, as we let the gentle rhythm of his journey settle softly into our minds, let us take a deep, slow breath, letting it out with the same calm flow as his quiet footsteps, letting the soft imagery of his long, patient, mysterious walk carry us gently into rest, a peaceful end to the day, a lullaby for the mind, a whisper of quiet adventure that reminds us that even the most unusual paths can leave soft, meaningful echoes, and that life, in its quietest, most deliberate moments, can be beautiful, gentle, and deeply comforting. So, as the night deepens, and your eyes grow heavy, and your body softens into the comfort of stillness, let the story of Harry Bensley, the man who walked the world behind a mask, rest with you, step by step, breath by breath, letting every detail, every quiet moment, every gentle sound of his journey lull you into a deep, calm, peaceful sleep. Close your eyes now, and let the world grow soft around you, the noises of the day fading slowly, like mist drifting away over quiet fields, and let this gentle story carry you, step by step, into calmness, into rest. Imagine a quiet morning, long ago, when the streets were empty except for a few wandering souls, the sunlight stretching softly across cobblestones, painting them gold and amber. And there, moving slowly, quietly, carefully, was a man whose face the world could not see, Harry Bensley, the man in the iron mask, and every step he took seemed to echo not loudly, but softly, like a whispered secret carried by the wind, a rhythm that could lull the heart and soothe the mind. Picture him now, walking through a village just waking up, the smell of fresh bread from a tiny bakery drifting gently through the air, the faint, distant song of a bird in the trees above, the soft clatter of hooves against stone in the quiet streets, and he moves calmly, deliberately, each step measured, carrying a small perambulator, each coin jingling softly inside it, every movement a meditation, every moment an echo of patience. As he walks, Imagine the gentle feeling of breeze brushing against your cheeks, soft, cool, comforting, carrying the scent of flowers, of earth, of rain from faraway lands. And with each breath you take, let the rhythm of his journey match the rhythm of your own body, step by step, breath by breath, softly, slowly. He moves past markets now, where quiet voices greet him, people curious, intrigued, yet respectful, smiles offered, hands extended, coins dropped into his small carriage. He never stops, never rushes, always gentle, always calm, letting the world move around him, letting the small kindnesses fill his heart. And in that quiet reflection, imagine your own heart softening, growing lighter, letting go of the day, letting the world's worries drift gently away. Step by step, the journey continues through towns where the fog lingers like a soft blanket, through streets where sunlight catches on rooftops and creates a glow so warm it feels like a hug, the sound of distant water trickling, leaves rustling, the faint hum of life moving on without rush or concern, and he moves slowly through it all, the iron mask await, yet strangely comforting, a reminder that sometimes strength lies in quiet persistence, in silent dedication, in simply walking forward. Imagine now the world changing around him, seasons shifting like a slow, soft dance, spring flowers unfolding delicately in the morning sun, summer afternoons warm and lazy, carrying the scents of grass and distant oceans, autumn leaves swirling softly in the wind, painting streets with amber and gold, winter mornings crisp, with frost sparkling lightly on every branch. And through it all, Harry moves calmly, steadily, slowly, letting the world carry him along, letting his steps echo like a gentle lullaby. Even when challenges arise, storms blowing cold rain against his back, crowds pressing with curiosity, the weight of the mask pressing on his head, he continues, calmly, deliberately, quietly, like a river flowing through a forest, never stopping, never rushing, every step a meditation, every moment a chance to be present, to be aware, to be gentle with oneself. And now, as evening falls softly across his path, imagine the sky painting itself in deep purples and soft oranges, the sun sinking slowly, letting the first stars peek out, the air growing quiet, the distant chirping of crickets beginning, and he walks still, every step soft, almost a whisper, every breath slow, rhythmic, soothing, the perambulator beside him carrying not just coins, but memories of kindness, of small encounters, of quiet moments that linger long after they pass. Feel the calm settling over you. Let it move through your body, through your mind, like a soft, slow river, carrying away the tension, carrying away the worries, and in your mind, see Harry's journey continue softly, step by step, through distant lands, across gentle hills, past quiet villages, through soft forests where the wind whispers through leaves, each step echoing gently in the air, a reminder that quiet persistence, gentle courage, and calm patience create beauty in the world. And as the night deepens, imagine him finally resting, sitting on a quiet hill under the soft glow of moonlight, the mask removed now, the world peaceful around him, the stars reflecting softly in his eyes, and in that peaceful silence, let your own body sink deeper into rest. Let your mind float gently like leaves on a calm pond. Let the soft rhythm of Harry's journey, step by step, guide you into sleep, into calm dreams, into a gentle, restful night. Step by step, breath by breath, softly, slowly. Let your eyelids grow heavy, the world around you fading, the gentle echoes of footsteps and soft wind carrying you into a night of peace. And as the story settles in your mind, let yourself drift completely, knowing that the quiet courage of a single man walking the world behind a mask can remind us all to move slowly, live gently, and rest peacefully. Close your eyes now, and let your body sink slowly into comfort. Feel the weight of the day melting away. Let your thoughts grow soft, and let the quiet story of a man long ago carry you gently into rest. There was once, in the early years of the 20th century, a man named Harry Bensley, a man whose life would become a story whispered through time, a story of courage, curiosity, and quiet determination. He was an ordinary man in many ways, Yet he agreed to something extraordinary, a challenge that no one else dared to attempt. A bet between wealthy, powerful men. A bet that asked if one person could walk the world, entirely unseen, carrying only what he could manage, and hiding his face behind a heavy iron mask. Step by step, he accepted this challenge, though the weight of it was immense, though the world around him was uncertain, ever-changing, and full of distractions. Picture him on that first morning, in the streets of London, the fog curling softly around lampposts, the distant sound of horses' hooves echoing against the cobblestones. His iron mask reflected a soft, muted light, hiding his features from every passerby, yet revealing a quiet determination in the shape of his stance, in the rhythm of his movements. He carried a small perambulator, modest and unassuming, and in it, coins, pamphlets, postcards, all that he could use to sustain himself as he walked onward, step by step, mile by mile, town by town. The world around him was alive, but in a gentle, almost muted way. Children's laughter echoed faintly in streets he passed. Women paused to look, curious but respectful. Vendors called softly to sell their wares. Yet he moved on, calmly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of his steps match the quiet rhythm of the world around him. Each day became a meditation, each step a quiet affirmation that patience, courage, and gentle determination could shape a life. Imagine him now in a small village in the countryside, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across fields of wheat and corn. The air smells faintly of earth and grass, a soft, grounding scent. He walks slowly along the main road, his footsteps light yet persistent. People notice him, pause briefly, smile, perhaps give a coin or a card, and then he continues, unhurried, almost like a shadow drifting through their lives. The mask hides him, but it also allows him to see the world clearly, without expectation, without judgment, simply observing, simply moving, simply being. As the months pass, the seasons change. Spring brings soft warmth and new growth. Flowers unfold slowly in the sunlight. The air carries the scent of rain on soil, of rivers winding gently through the valleys. Summer brings long, golden afternoons, where the heat presses gently on the stones of narrow streets, and the sky stretches endlessly overhead. Autumn paints the world in amber, gold, and crimson. Leaves swirl softly in the wind. Winter follows, wrapping everything in mist, in frost, in the quiet hush of cold mornings. And through it all, Harry walks, step by step, breath by breath, moving calmly, letting each moment settle gently into memory, letting the rhythm of the journey become part of his being. Imagine now the soft, almost invisible moments that no one noticed. A cat curled on a windowsill as he passed by, the faint flutter of birds' wings in the morning air, the sound of distant water trickling from a fountain, the subtle creak of a cart in the village square. These small, quiet details filled his days, and in them, he found a kind of peace, a gentle joy, a reminder that even in the most unusual and challenging circumstances, the world carries soft, gentle beauty if we take the time to notice it. Step by step, he walked through countries beyond Britain, through streets where languages sounded strange, where customs were unfamiliar, yet he moved with the same calm, quiet patience. He sold postcards, offered smiles, sometimes exchanged a nod with someone who paused just long enough to notice him. He never rushed. He never demanded attention. He simply continued, allowing the journey itself to be his teacher, allowing each small interaction, each fleeting moment, to leave a gentle impression on his heart. And now imagine, in the soft evenings, when the sun dips behind distant hills and the sky turns to deep shades of purple and indigo, Harry resting for a moment, still in the mask, still quiet, breathing in the calm air. He reflects on the journey, not the bet, not the challenge, not the unfinished goal, but on the life he has lived quietly, carefully, deliberately. Each mile he walked, each town he entered, each stranger he encountered, left a mark on him. And in return, he left a subtle mark on the world. Even when the shadows of war reached across the lands he traveled, when the quiet peace of towns was disrupted by distant, troubling sounds, he continued as long as he could, stepping gently through a world that was changing, that was moving forward in ways he could not control. And even in these moments, he learns something important, that the journey itself, the act of moving, of persisting, of being present in each moment, is more valuable than any end, any reward, any recognition. Now, as you listen, imagine yourself walking alongside him. Not hurried, not concerned with distance or direction, just walking. Step by step, feel the soft rhythm of your breath, the gentle weight of the day lifting, the calm of quiet streets at dawn, the soft murmur of rivers, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant song of birds settling as night approaches. And with each gentle step, feel your body growing heavier, more relaxed, sinking into comfort, into rest. Picture the final days of his journey. He does not reach every goal. He does not complete every challenge. But he carries a quiet satisfaction, a gentle pride, a deep calm. And now, in your mind, let that calmness flow to you. Let the rhythm of his quiet determination lull you, step by step, breath by breath, into deep relaxation, into soft, peaceful sleep. The iron mask resting quietly now, the journey behind him, the memories lingering like soft shadows. And as you drift deeper into this calm, remember the lessons of his life. Patience, quiet courage, gentle perseverance, and the beauty of noticing the small, fleeting moments that surround us every day. Step by step, breath by breath, soft, slow, calm, and let the story fade gently into the quiet of your mind, letting every worry, every thought, every tension drift away, leaving only soft peace, soft sleep, soft dreams, as the world carries you gently into rest.